What would you do if the person you once loved, the one who shared your very first big dream, suddenly turned into the reason you couldn't sleep at night? Imagine this. You're in your early 20s, young, stubborn, and in love. You buy a crumbling old house together, thinking you'll fix it up, build a future, maybe even a family. Years later, the love is gone, but the house and the debt are still there. And now, he's back, demanding money, blowing up your phone, even dragging your parents into it. This is my story, and I still don't know if I'm the villain or the victim. I was 22 the first time I saw the house. To most people, it was a dump. The paint was chipped, the roof sagged, and the porch steps looked like they were one more winter away from collapsing. But to me, at that age, it felt like possibility. I looked past the broken shutters and cracked foundation and saw us, a home, a future. Jake, my boyfriend back then, stood beside me in the overgrown yard, grinning like a kid who just found buried treasure. "This could be ours," he said. And in that moment, I believed him. I believed in us. When you're in your 20s, you don't see risk the way you do later in life. You see adventure. You see potential. You tell yourself that love is enough to plaster over the cracks in the walls and the cracks in the relationship. We thought we were buying a home, but really, we were buying a dream. The price was low, suspiciously low, but that only made it more attractive. Sure, it needed work, a lot of work, but we weren't afraid of that. We told ourselves we'd fix it together. We told ourselves that sweat and love could hold a house up better than any foundation. So we signed the papers. 2 kids with no idea what we were walking into. And for a little while, it almost felt like we were right. The first few weeks were chaos in the most romantic way possible. We laughed when the lights flickered, like we were living in some haunted mansion. We stayed up until 2 in the morning ripping up carpet that smelled like 100 years of cigarettes. Every problem felt like a challenge we could conquer together, and at night, when we collapsed into bed with paint still on our hands, I thought, this is it. This is adulthood. This is what it means to build a life with someone. But if I had known then what I know now, how quickly love can sour, how heavy a promise can become, I might have walked away from that house the very first day. The thing about buying a fixer-upper in your 20s is that it feels like the ultimate love test. Every hole in the drywall, every leaky faucet, every squeaky floorboard, it's all supposed to be something you fix together. That's what Jake and I told ourselves anyway. The truth? We had no idea what we were doing. Jake was handy in the way most 20-something guys are. He could swing a hammer, YouTube a tutorial, and then swear when it didn't look like the video. I wasn't any better. I could paint a wall, sure, but I didn't know the first thing about plumbing or rewiring. Still, we attacked that house like it was our shared enemy. There was something intoxicating about those late nights. Music blasting from a dusty old speaker, takeout containers stacked in the corner, the 2 of us covered in sweat and sawdust, laughing as we pulled out cabinets older than we were. There was pride in it, like we were earning this house, brick by brick. But even then, I think I knew, the house was more than just a project. It was a mirror. And mirrors, don't lie. I remember one night, maybe a month in, when the water heater broke. We didn't have the money for a new one, not really, but Jake insisted he could fix it. "Babe, trust me," he said, kneeling in front of it with a wrench. An hour later, the basement was flooded. We stood ankle deep in freezing water, staring at each other. And for the first time I saw the flash of temper in his eyes. The way he snapped at me for holding the flashlight wrong. As if all of this were my fault. We laughed it off later, wrapped in towels and shivering on the couch. But the crack was there, small, almost invisible, but real. Money was always tight. The house had been cheap, yes, but cheap comes with a cost. Every paycheck went into repairs, and every repair seemed to uncover another problem. A pipe burst in the kitchen ceiling. The roof leaked during the first heavy rain. The front porch steps, those sagging, groaning steps, finally gave way under Jake's weight one morning, sending him tumbling into the yard. He wasn't hurt, but his pride was. I could see it wearing on him. On us. We were too young to admit it, but the house was swallowing us whole. And yet, there were moments. Like the first time we managed to paint the living room. We stood back, covered in flecks of blue paint, and for a second it actually looked like home. Jake wrapped his arms around me, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, "This is just the beginning." Or the night we dragged an old mattress into the middle of the empty dining room, ordered cheap pizza, and ate by candlelight because the electricity had gone out again. It felt like something out of a movie to broke kids against the world, making magic out of nothing. Those moments were real. But so were the arguments, the pressure of the house, the money, the endless work. It all started to show in our relationship. I don't even remember what the first big fight was about. Maybe the bills. Maybe the fact that Jake wanted new tools instead of groceries. Maybe just the exhaustion of living in a construction zone. All I know is that the house stopped feeling like ours. It started feeling like his project, his dream, his frustration. I was there, of course, working just as hard. But whenever something went wrong, it was always my fault, and slowly, almost without noticing, the laughter started to fade. Looking back, I think that's where it all began to unravel. The house we thought would bring us closer was already pushing us apart. But I didn't see it then. I couldn't. I was too busy trying to make it work, both the house and the relationship, because when you're 22 and you've just signed your name on a mortgage, you don't want to admit you might have made a mistake. You just keep painting over the cracks, hoping no one notices what's underneath. The thing no one tells you about owning a house in your 20s is that it doesn't just test your skills, it tests your patience, your bank account, your relationship, your sanity. For us, it tested everything. T first. The stress showed up in small ways. Jake was more irritable. I was more quiet. We argued about little things, the kind of things you laugh about when you're dating, but when you're co-owners of a mortgage, they don't feel so funny anymore, like groceries. I'd come home with a bag of food, and he'd say, "Why'd you buy this brand? It's more expensive." Or like bills. I'd mention that we needed to save for a new furnace, and he'd roll his eyes and say, "Relax, we'll figure it out." It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the tone. That constant edge, like I was nagging, like I was dragging us down. Like the problems in the house were somehow mine to solve. The house itself didn't make things easier. One summer afternoon, I came home from work and found Jake sitting in the half-finished living room, surrounded by tools and empty beer cans. The wall he'd been trying to patch looked worse than before. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "You said you'd fix this by today," I reminded him gently. He snapped. "Do you have any idea how hard this is? Why don't you try fixing a damn wall for once instead of criticizing me?" I froze. It wasn't just what he said, it was the venom in his voice. The kind of anger that comes from someplace deeper than drywall. I wanted to yell back. I wanted to remind him of all the nights I'd stayed up painting, the mornings I'd dragged myself to Home Depot before work, the bills I'd covered when he came up short. But instead, I swallowed it, because the truth was, I didn't want to fight. I wanted us to work. So I stayed quiet, but silence is heavy, and it builds over time. The house became a battlefield. Not with fists or broken dishes, just with words. Words sharp enough to cut through the thin walls we hadn't finished insulating. I remember one night when it rained so hard the roof leaked again. We rushed to put out buckets, towels, anything we could find. I was exhausted, drenched, and I muttered, "This house is falling apart." Jake turned to me, his eyes dark. "Maybe it's not the house. Maybe it's us." He didn't mean it as a threat, but I felt the ground shift under me. For the first time, I realized the dream we had been clinging to might not survive. The intimacy faded too. We used to fall asleep tangled together, paint still on our clothes. Now we fell asleep back to back, too tired, too bitter, too frustrated. The house had become a third person in our relationship, loud, needy, impossible to ignore. I'd lie awake some nights, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if we'd made a mistake. Not just with the house, but with each other. And yet, I stayed. Why? Because leaving felt impossible. Because we had history. Because my name was on that mortgage. Because walking away at 23 felt like admitting defeat, and I wasn't ready to do that. So I told myself what everyone tells themselves in failing relationships: it will get better. This is just a phase. But deep down, I think I already knew the truth. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It came in moments. The slammed doors, the unpaid bills, the way Jake's laughter sounded different, harder, colder, the way I started spending more time at work just to avoid coming home. And finally, one night, sitting at that same kitchen table where we used to eat pizza by candlelight, he said it. "I don't think this is working." I wanted to argue. I wanted to beg. But instead, I just nodded. Because I didn't think it was working either. That was the night the house stopped being ours. Breakups are rarely clean. People like to imagine they happen in one conversation, one tearful goodbye, one dramatic exit. But the truth is, breakups are slow deaths. They linger. They rot quietly in the corners of your life until one day, you realize the person you loved is already gone, even if their clothes are still in your closet. For us, it ended in a whisper, not a scream. After Jake said those words, "I don't think this is working," we sat in silence for what felt like hours. Neither of us wanted to move. Neither of us wanted to be the first to stand up. Finally, he pushed his chair back, exhaled, and said, "I'll move my stuff out this weekend." That was it. No dramatic fight, no throwing plates, no begging for another chance. Just a quiet agreement that the dream we had built together was done. The next few days were a blur of cardboard boxes and heavy silences. I watched him pack his life into bags and bins, watched him carry pieces of us out the door. Every slammed trunk felt like a nail in the coffin. I tried to be practical, tried to remind myself that it was better this way. But practicality doesn't erase the smell of someone's shirts still lingering in your laundry room. It doesn't erase the way the house felt emptier with every load he carried out. When the last box was gone, I stood in the doorway of my house, and it hit me. I was alone, not just single, not just heartbroken, but truly, terrifyingly alone in a house too big for one person, with a mortgage that suddenly felt like a chain around my neck. A few days later, Jake and I sat down one final time to talk about money. "I'll keep paying my half until you figure something out," he said. His voice was flat, businesslike, no warmth left. I shook my head. "No, I'll take it over." He looked surprised. "Are you sure? It's a lot for one person." I forced a smile I didn't feel. "I'll manage." And then I promised him something I wasn't sure I could keep, that I would pay him back. Every cent he had put into the house, I would return. It was pride. Stubborn, reckless pride. But I couldn't stand the idea of him walking away thinking I had failed. I wanted to prove I was stronger than he thought, that I didn't need him, that I could handle it. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. Bills stacked up. Repairs piled on. The silence of the house was deafening. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, stayed up late painting rooms I hated just so they'd feel more like mine. Every time I wrote a check to the bank, I felt the weight of that promise pressing down on me. I'll pay him back. It wasn't just about the money. It was about dignity, about proving to myself that I wasn't broken, that this house, even with its cracked walls and leaking roof, could still be a home. But late at night, when the silence wrapped around me like a shroud, I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. There's a strange thing that happens after a breakup when you're left with the things you built together. The bed feels too big. The kitchen feels too quiet. Every corner holds a ghost. I'd walk past the living room and see us laughing on the floor with pizza boxes. I'd go into the backyard and remember the night we lay on the grass, dreaming about kids and barbecues. Now it was just me, the ghosts and the debt. And yet, I clung to that house like it was the last piece of me worth saving. Because it wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof. Proof that I could survive heartbreak, survive loneliness, survive the crushing weight of responsibility, even if it killed me trying. The first morning after Jake left, the house felt haunted. Not by ghosts, but by absence. His coffee mug was gone from the counter, his boots no longer by the door, and for the first time in months, there was no one snoring beside me when I woke up. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it was suffocating. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty half of the mattress, and whispered to myself, "You can do this." I had to believe it. Because the alternative, the thought of failing, of drowning under bills and loneliness, was unbearable. The house quickly turned into both my enemy and my salvation. Every broken faucet, every creaky step, every peeling wall reminded me of what Jake and I had started and never finished. But every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, every dollar I scraped together felt like a small rebellion. A way of telling the universe, I won't give up. I worked long hours at my job, then came home and worked longer hours on the house. My hands were blistered, my back ached, but there was a strange pride in it. I was rebuilding not just the house, but myself. At night, I'd collapse on the couch, sometimes too exhausted to even eat dinner, and stare at the ceiling, imagining what the future might look like. Some nights I cried until I fell asleep. Other nights I let myself dream. Money, of course, was always the shadow following me. The mortgage was brutal. Add utilities, repairs, groceries, and suddenly, my paycheck felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I clipped coupons, skipped outings with friends, even sold old clothes online just to stretch each dollar. And always, in the back of my mind, Was the 5,000, the money I promised Jake.it loomed over me like a debt not just of dollars, but of honor. I replayed our conversations in my head. I'll pay you back. I swear. I had typed those words into texts more than once, desperate to make it clear that I hadn't forgotten. But the truth was, I couldn't give it to him yet. Not without sinking myself completely, and so, I carried the weight, quietly, alone. Still, life had a way of pushing forward. Even when you felt stuck, I found routines. Coffee in the morning, always in the same chipped mug. Music blasting while I scrubbed floors. A glass of cheap wine on Friday nights, my small reward for surviving another week, and slowly, painfully slowly the house began to change. The leaky sink got fixed. The bedroom walls were repainted. I planted flowers in the front yard, bright yellow ones that made the place look less like a forgotten wreck and more like home. Neighbors noticed. One older woman, Mrs. Carter from down the street, stopped by one day while I was weeding. "You've done wonders with this place," she said. It was such an eyesore before. Her words nearly made me cry. Because for the first time since Jake left, I felt seen. Like, maybe I wasn't just surviving, I was actually building something. But no matter how much progress I made, the phone calls were always waiting. Jake's number would flash on the screen. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. When I did, it always came back to the same thing. The money. "When do you think you'll have it?" he'd ask, his voice tight. "I'm working on it," I'd reply, trying to sound steady. But the truth was, the more he pushed, the more cornered I felt. It wasn't that I didn't want to pay him, it was that I needed to do it on my terms, not his. And that tension began to fester, turning every conversation into a battlefield. Some nights, I sat on the porch steps, staring at the dark street, wondering if I had trapped myself, if holding on to the house was worth the endless struggle, if it would have been easier to just sell, hand Jake his money, and walk away. But then I'd look at the flowers in the yard, or the fresh paint on the walls, and feel something stir in my chest. This house wasn't just wood and nails. It was my fight, my statement to the world and to Jake that I wasn't going to be defined by failure, even if it cost me everything. I wasn't ready to let go. Great, let's dive into part 2B, where the pressure from Jake starts to escalate. Family members get involved, and what was once a private struggle begins spilling into the open. This is where the emotional tension ramps up. It started slowly. A missed call here, a voicemail there. But soon, Jake's number was lighting up my phone like a warning siren. At first, I thought he was just checking and wanting updates, making sure I hadn't forgotten. But the tone of his messages changed fast. "Hey, just wondering when you'll have the money. Then, you said you'd pay me back. And finally, I need it now. Don't drag this out." The texts came in clusters, one after another, like punches I couldn't block. My phone would buzz on the nightstand at a.m., jolting me awake. I stopped looking at my notifications because I knew what they'd say. "Pay me back. Pay me back. Pay me back." I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself I was working hard, that I wasn't running away from the debt, that I would give him the 5,000, but only when it made sense. But Jake wasn't hearing reason anymore. One night, after I ignored 3 of his calls, he left a voicemail that sent a chill through me. "You're holding my money hostage. Don't think I won't do something about it." I sat there on the couch, my hands trembling, replaying his words. This was the same boy who once built bookshelves with me, who carved our initials into the porch railing. Now he sounded like a stranger, and then he involved my parents. I got a call from my mom one evening. Her voice was soft, careful, the way it always was when she didn't want to upset me. "Sweetheart, Jake called us today." My stomach dropped. "He what?" "He said he's still waiting for his money." He sounded upset. "We just thought maybe it would be easier if you went ahead and sold the house. Gave him what he's owed." My chest tightened. It wasn't that my parents didn't care about me, they did. But they were practical people. To them, money was simple math. If you owed it, you paid it. End of story. "Mom," I said, my voice sharper than I meant, "this isn't just about the money. It's about the house. It's about everything Jake and I went through." There was silence on the line. Then a sigh. "We just don't want you to get hurt." I hung up feeling betrayed. The one place I thought I could turn for support was siding with him, the person who was tormenting me. From that point on, the pressure doubled. Jake kept calling. My parents kept asking questions. And I was caught in the middle. trying to hold on to the house, my sanity, and my pride all at once. The worst part, every time Jake accused me of stalling, I felt a flicker of guilt because deep down, I knew he was right. I was stalling, not because I wanted to cheat him, but because I needed the house to mean more than just a financial transaction. But Jake didn't see meaning. He saw money, and that difference between us grew wider every day until it felt like a canyon. One night, after a particularly heated phone call where he shouted, "You're stealing from me," I put the phone down and cried so hard I couldn't breathe. Was I stealing? Was I wrong for holding on? I looked around the house, the patched up walls, the blooming flowers, the sweat I had poured into every corner, and whispered out loud, "No, this is mine." But even as I said it, I knew the battle with Jake was only just beginning. The calls didn't stop. They multiplied. If I didn't answer, he'd leave a voicemail. If I didn't respond to the voicemail, he'd text. And if I dared to ignore both, he'd call again and again and again. My phone became a weapon against me, buzzing, vibrating, lighting up until I wanted to throw it against the wall. One night, after I had let it ring for the 5th time, I finally picked up. "What do you want, Jake?" I snapped, exhaustion dripping from my voice. "You know what I want," he shot back. "My money. 5 grand. That's it. Why are you dragging this out? I told you I'll pay you. But on my terms, not yours." He laughed bitterly. "Your terms? You think you get to set the rules when you're sitting in my investment? You're living in that house because of me." My chest tightened. His investment? His house? I felt the words like a slap. "No, Jake. I bought you out. It's mine now. I've put every ounce of myself into this place. You don't get to claim it anymore." There was a pause, then his voice dropped lower, harder. "Don't make me come back for it." The line went dead. I sat frozen on the couch, phone in my hand, heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. For the first time, I wasn't just angry, I was scared. Fear changes everything. I started double-checking my locks at night. I jumped whenever a car slowed down outside my house. Even the creak of the old floorboards made me tense. Jake had never been violent with me, but people change. Breakups twist them. Money twists them. And I didn't know who he was anymore. What made it worse was the isolation. My parents thought I was being stubborn. My friends were busy with their own lives. And I didn't want to admit how bad it had gotten because admitting it would mean I wasn't in control anymore. So I carried it alone. The house, the debt, the fear. When Jake realized his calls weren't breaking me, he changed tactics. He started showing up in conversations I wasn't part of. Mutual friends would call and say, "Hey, Jake mentioned you still owe him money. What's going on?" It was humiliating. He was painting me as the villain, the selfish ex who refused to pay her debts. Then he started messaging my coworkers. Subtle things. Nothing outright threatening, but just enough to make them ask questions. I could see it in their faces, the pity, the suspicion, and then he crossed the line. One evening, I came home to find a note tucked into my front door. It wasn't in an envelope, just a scrap of paper with his handwriting scrawled across it. "You can't ignore me forever." My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about power, about control. I tore the note into pieces, my hands shaking. But the damage was already done. He knew where I lived, of course he did. He had lived there too. He knew the weak spots of the house, the creaky back gate, the window that didn't lock properly. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. The house that I had fought so hard to claim as mine suddenly felt like a trap. Still, beneath the fear, there was something else, defiance. He wanted me to feel small, cornered, helpless. But I refused to give him that satisfaction. I stood in the kitchen at staring out at the dark yard, and whispered to myself, "You don't get to take this from me. Not the house, not my peace, not my life." And in that moment, I made a decision. If Jake was going to turn this into a war, then I was done playing defense. It was time to fight back. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, like the first cold wind before a storm. Jake's calls, his texts, the way his name would flash on my phone and make my stomach tighten. At first, I could ignore them, pretend they didn't exist. But eventually, ignoring them became impossible. It was Thursday morning. I was juggling 2 cups of coffee, my tote bag, and my keys as I ran out of the apartment complex, trying not to be late for work. My phone buzzed again. "Jake, where's my money?" I groaned, stuffing it into my pocket, pretending it wasn't there. I had rehearsed my responses 100 times. I'll pay you when I can. I'm working on it. But hearing his name was enough to make me feel like I hadn't slept in a week. The calls escalated. Multiple in a row, early morning, late at night, each text dripping with impatience, bitterness, sometimes anger. He started sending long paragraphs, half pleading, half accusing. You promised. You're stalling. You think this is funny? Every time I read one, I felt my chest tighten. My hands would shake. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I didn't. I couldn't. He had lived in that house once. He knew every weak spot, every creak in the floor, every unlocked window. Fear wasn't just emotion, it was a physical thing, pressing down on me as I tried to live my normal life. Eventually, he proposed we meet. A neutral place, he said. Just talk, he said. I chose the old cafe we used to go to, the one with cracked tiles and a barista who always remembered our orders. I thought maybe seeing him face to face could finally end this nightmare. When I arrived, he was already there, hands wrapped around a lukewarm coffee cup, eyes narrowing when he saw me. Morning, I said cautiously, sliding into the booth opposite him. Morning, he said flatly. No warmth. The boy I knew, the one who had once held my hand during thunderstorms, was gone. We sat in silence for a moment. He stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug. Then he said it. I want my money. $5,000. You said you'd pay me back months ago. Why haven't you? I took a deep breath. Jake, I told you. I'm not ignoring you. I want to pay you back, but not at the cost of losing the house or everything I've put into it. I'm trying to do this responsibly, not just hand it over to you immediately. His eyes flashed. Responsibly? You think I care about you responsible? I gave you my money because I trusted you. Now I feel like you're cheating me. I felt my pulse rise. I'm not cheating you. I'm trying to make sure the house goes to someone who will actually live in it, not flip it for profit. This isn't about me holding out. It's about what's right. He slammed his cup on the table. Coffee splashed, staining the napkin. You always had to make everything about your morals. It's money. It's $5,000. And in that moment, I realized no argument, no explanation would reach him. He wasn't the same person I had once known. And part of me mourned that. As if the coffee shop confrontation wasn't enough, he went a step further. He called my parents. I'll never forget that Sunday evening. My mom was stirring meatloaf in the kitchen, the sweet smell of baked bread and roasted vegetables filling the room. My dad sat at the table, a beer in hand, reading the paper. I walked in, and Mom's face immediately fell. Sweetheart, she said gently, Jake called us today. I froze, heart sinking. What? He said he's still waiting for his money. He sounded upset. We thought maybe it would be easier if you sold the house and gave him what he's owed. I clenched my jaw. Mom, it's not that simple. This isn't just about money. This house, it's my home. I've put everything into it. I'm not just going to hand it over. Dad put down his paper. Honey, we're not saying you have to. But he gave you the money. You promised. If you drag this out, he might. I don't know. Make things worse. I felt trapped. I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind them that this wasn't about disobedience, it was about principle. But instead, I said nothing, swallowed my frustration, and left the kitchen. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every knock on the door, every creak in the floor sounded like it could be him. The house felt smaller, suffocating, and I realized that Jake's influence had seeped into every corner of my life, even my family. I started to remember the past. Jake and I had grown up together, school buses, neighborhood baseball games, teenage dares. We had once been inseparable. Every memory felt like a scar now, a reminder of what had been lost. I went through old photos, quietly, alone. Him grinning at graduation. The two of us in front of a faded brick wall with paint on our hands, laughing. It felt like someone else's life. The boy who once made me feel safe now made me feel threatened. Even texting friends about him became difficult. They would ask, is he being unreasonable? I nodded, smiled, but inside, I was still debating. Was I overreacting? Was I exaggerating? Or had the boy I knew really turned into someone I couldn't trust? The turning point came one late night. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my laptop open, documents scattered everywhere. The law firm's number sat on a sticky note, next to the pile of printouts from local harassment laws. I realized then that fear was only part of the equation. Defiance, clarity, and preparation were just as important. I started documenting everything: texts, calls, voicemails, notes left at the house. I spoke with my lawyer, and she outlined my rights, what could be done legally, and how to protect myself without escalating the conflict unnecessarily. It wasn't easy. The emotional labor was enormous. I cried, I panicked, I questioned myself. But every action, every step toward accountability and safety gave me a little more control. By the time the week ended, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: agency. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was acting. I was protecting my home, my dignity, and myself. I knew Jake would try again. He might escalate further. But for the first time, I was ready to face it head on. And I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies, I had a plan, and most importantly, I had my own strength. And that strength, that defiance, was the only thing keeping me sane in a house that had once been full of love but now demanded courage. The weeks after I started documenting everything were tense. Every knock at the door, every unexpected car in the driveway, made me jump. But I also felt ready. For the first time in months, I had a sense of control. Not total control, but enough to make a plan. I scheduled a consultation with the lawyer I had saved from the sticky note. Her office was neat, quiet, and smelled faintly of vanilla candles, a sharp contrast to the chaos I felt in my own home. "Tell me everything," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I told her about Jake, the calls, the texts, the note at my door, and the way he had involved my parents. I told her about the promise of $5,000 and the escalating harassment. I expected her to sigh and tell me I was overreacting, but instead, she leaned forward. "This is harassment," she said. "It's verbal, emotional, and documented. You have a strong case for protective measures if necessary. But first, let's try a formal demand letter." Sometimes a professional notice is enough to stop people from escalating. The thought of involving the law was terrifying. But sitting there, listening to her break it down, I realized that the fear I had been living under didn't have to be permanent. I could act, not just survive. We drafted a letter, professional, calm, stating clearly that he was no longer welcome to contact me outside agreed upon channels, and that any further harassment could result in legal action. Sending it felt like a small victory, like taking the first brick off a wall I had been trapped behind. 2 days later, I saw the text I had been dreading. "Jake, got your letter. This isn't over." I felt a pang of panic, but also a strange thrill. He was acknowledging me formally now. I had forced the conversation into a framework I could control. I spent that night reviewing my documentation, screenshots of calls, timestamps, copies of texts. I even included photos of the note he had left. Each file felt like armor. Each page was a declaration. I am not powerless. A week later, I arrived home after a long day at work, my hands full of grocery bags, my shoulders aching. I paused at the door and noticed a car parked across the street, not his. Not a threat, but enough to make me cautious. I locked every door, checked every window, and then sat down with a cup of tea. The phone rang. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. "Jake," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You sent the letter," he said, his tone unreadable. "Yes, I did. It's for both our protection." There was a pause. Then, "Fine, but I still want my money. Soon. I will pay you back, Jake, but it will happen on my terms. Not through threats, not through fear. I am not giving up this house, and I am not letting you intimidate me anymore." He was silent for a moment, longer than I expected. Then he said, "We'll see." That was all. Short, dismissive, but the dynamic had shifted. He realized I wasn't scared anymore. The days that followed were quieter, though not without tension. I continued documenting, continued painting, repairing, and maintaining the house. My friends came over to help with small projects, laughing as we ripped up old carpets and planted flowers in the yard. The house began to feel like home again, not just walls and a mortgage, but a space of comfort and resilience. Mom and Dad gradually understood my perspective. They stopped asking when I would pay him back and started asking how I was coping. For the first time in months, I felt supported instead of judged. And Jake, he tried. He sent a few more texts, a couple of calls, but each time, I followed my lawyer's advice. Don't engage unnecessarily. Document. Respond calmly if needed. The tension began to fade slowly. The house that had once felt like a trap transformed back into a sanctuary. a testament to my persistence. One night, sitting on the porch with a blanket wrapped around me, I watched the stars peek through the trees in the yard. The air smelled of damp earth and freshly planted flowers. I allowed myself to think about Jake, not with fear, not with anger, but with acknowledgement. He had been a part of my life. He had been my first love, my friend, my partner in building a home. But that part of my life was over, and I survived it. Not unscathed, not without scars, but stronger. I realized that the house wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of independence, of perseverance, of choosing myself in a world that sometimes tried to push me down. Months later, after sending the $5,000 in a controlled, documented way, the harassment finally stopped. Jake's calls ceased. His messages no longer arrived, and the weight that had pressed on my chest for months lifted. I walked through the house one quiet Sunday afternoon, the light falling through the windows just right, casting warm patterns on the freshly painted walls. The flowers in the yard swayed in the wind. The repairs I had made were visible in every corner, and I smiled, not at him, not at the money, not at the fight, but at myself. I had survived heartbreak, harassment, and fear. I had taken a house that once symbolized shared dreams and turned it into a space of my own making. This was victory. Not dramatic, not public, but personal, quiet, solid, and mine. The story isn't about revenge. It's about resilience, about finding strength in the face of fear, about understanding that material promises, money, houses, possessions cannot define you. Only your choices, your courage, and your actions can. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting the walls in streaks of gold. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace in the house. Not because the conflict with Jake was fully behind me, it lingered in memory, in the way my hands sometimes clenched unconsciously, but because I had reclaimed control. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked around. The flowers in the yard were blooming more vibrantly than ever. The walls were painted in colors I had chosen, every brushstroke a testament to the months I had fought to keep this place mine. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that I could endure fear, betrayal, and pressure and come out stronger. I reflected on the journey. At 20-something, I had thought buying a house would be a simple milestone, a rite of passage into adulthood. I didn't realize it would become a test of character, patience, and resolve. I had learned independence is not just about having your own space. It's about defending it. Strength is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. People change. Friends, lovers, even childhood companions can become strangers. Holding on to the past can weigh you down. I wrote these thoughts down in a small journal I kept on the counter. Each page was a reminder. My story wasn't about Jake. It was about me, about the life I was building and the values I refused to compromise. Life slowly returned to a rhythm of small, quiet joys. I cooked meals for myself, sometimes lingering at the table to savor them. I read books I had neglected during the months of fear. I started jogging along the quiet streets near my house, feeling the cool morning air on my skin, the rhythm of my own heartbeat reminding me I was alive and free. Friends came over. We laughed over coffee spills, over paint-splattered floors, over inside jokes from a lifetime ago. I realized how isolating the last months had been, not because of the house, but because of fear. And now, reconnecting brought a kind of warmth I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. Jake had been part of my life, but his departure, first emotionally, then physically, then legally, taught me a lesson in boundaries. Trust is precious. Promises mean little without respect. And love, even when genuine at one point, doesn't justify manipulation or harassment. I thought about forgiveness, not for him, but for myself. For the times I doubted my choices, for the moments I let fear dominate, for the nights I cried alone. I forgave myself for being human. I walked through each room. The living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, each corner carried a memory of struggle, effort, and triumph. Every repaired wall, every newly planted flower, every corner I had cleaned with my own hands, it all whispered, "You did this. You survived. You own this." The house was more than a structure. It was a metaphor for life, messy, challenging, sometimes frightening, but ultimately shaped by our own hands. I looked out the window at the street I had once feared would hold threats. It now looked calm, almost welcoming. Children played down the block. Neighbors waved as they walked past. Life went on. And so would I. I made a promise to myself, to protect my peace fiercely. to never let fear silence me, to pursue dreams with patience and resilience. The $5,000 I had owed Jake had been repaid, but it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the choice I had made to do it on my terms. The control, the dignity, the principle, these were the true rewards, and as the sun climbed higher in the sky, I felt it. The quiet pulse of freedom, the calm after the storm. I sipped my coffee, smiled, and whispered to myself, I did it. I survived. And this is just the beginning. Life doesn't always turn out the way we expect. People change, circumstances challenge us. But the story isn't about the obstacles, it's about how we respond. The house stands as a reminder of strength, courage, and independence. The journey taught me that resilience is earned, not given. That self-respect and perseverance are the pillars on which we build our own lives, and in that realization, I finally felt at home, not just in the house, but in my own skin, in my own story, and in my own future.